turning up the screen.
Welcome.
Screens.
Welcome. Thank you all for joining us and making time to come along this evening. My name is Lewis. I'm part of the organising team for this event. We are going to kick off with Professor James Dyke, who's here, who's, as I'm sure you all probably know, is an award-winning climate scientist from Exeter University. So basically, takeaway is there really isn't, there's not many better people in the world, I would say, to talk about climate science. Am I bigging you up too much? But James is going to give us a bit of an introduction about the science. Then we're going to have Mary, who's one of our local group members. With Mary, we're going to have Marilyn and Lavinia, again giving really short testimonials as to their experience. And following that, we'll get into discussions around our table.
Hello, my name's James, and I'm a Earth System Scientist at the University of Exeter. Thank you for inviting me today. Thank you for everyone who's turning out on not ideal weather. And thank you for giving me this platform. There's lots of people who could be in my place right now, and arguably should be, but because I'm a white, middle-aged Western man, I get to do this. So I'm very mindful of the fact that there are other people that really should be talking about why we are here and why I'm here. So what I'm going to talk in the next 20 minutes, and I will keep to time, is why I think we're here, and why I think I'm here, which is kind of about the science, but to be honest with you, it's not really, right? We don't need more climate science to avoid dangerous climate change, because climate change isn't a problem of science. It's not a problem of physics, it's a problem of people. And we've known for a very long time what we need to do. We need to stop burning coal and oil and gas. And the rest are details. And I'm not suggesting that it's easy to stop burning coal, oil and gas, because that means not making money by burning coal, oil and gas. But what I can certainly do in the next 20 minutes or so, give you some context as to why we now need to rapidly stop the combustion of fossil fuels. So let me begin with the late 1980s. So 1988, James Hansen, a US climate scientist, arguably at the time the world's most famous climate scientist, not exactly a very large field, but he certainly made national and international headlines when he gave testimony to the US Congress in 1988, where he talked about the detectable increase in temperatures, the detectable increase in concentrations of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, and the consequences for humanity if it was to continue to burn coal, oil and gas, because temperatures would increase further, and we would be entering a period of what he called dangerous interference in the Earth's climate. Generally speaking, we've had a very stable climate for the last 11,000 years or so. It's called the Holocene epoch. It's the period of the climate where we've come out of the last glacial maximum. If you go back about 11,000, 12,000 years ago, there would have been kilometre-thick ice sheets in the north of England and much of the higher latitudes. Sea levels would have been 20, in places 40 metres lower than they were today. And as we moved out of that glacial maximum to the interglacial period, we saw remarkably stable temperatures, reasonably stable precipitation, and some people have argued it's no surprise that just at that point we see the emergence of farming, we see the emergence of complex societies, we see the emergence of pretty much all human civilizations. So the idea that civilization is constrained within a really narrow range of climatic conditions, I think is reasonably well established. And back in 1988, Jim was making the very simple argument, is if we change the climate so much that we exit from this Holocene condition, if we increase temperatures by 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, then there won't be complex civilizations anymore. And I quite like the way that John Schönhuber puts it. He's proved to be a very influential German climate scientist, Earth system scientist. And he said the difference between 2 degrees Celsius warming and 4 degrees Celsius warming by the end of this century is civilization itself. There will be billions of people who will be dead. There will be significant regions of the Earth's surface which will be literally uninhabitable for humans, let alone our ability to grow food or get water to drink. So back in 88, we knew what we needed to do. And back in 88, we could have undertaken a progressive decrease in our use of fossil fuels. We could have decarbonised at maybe 1% a year, maybe 2% a year. We could have decarbonised at a rate that you wouldn't have really noticed it if you were a regular person. Efficiencies would have increased. Your car might become a little bit smaller. There might have been fewer flights. There would have been an acceleration in kind of development in aviation. People might have eaten slightly different things. There could have been a progressive evolution in food systems. And that didn't happen, of course. Humanity has put about 2,500 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere since industrialisation, and over half of that has been put into the atmosphere since Jim Hansen gave that testimony in the late 1980s. We didn't slow down fossil fuel use, we doubled down. And we are now in a situation where we're going north of 1 degree Celsius of warming. We're going north of not just 350 parts per million concentrations, which is what Jim argued would be a safe climate, to beyond 420, 430 in the not too distant future. Now in 2015, the international community, for the first time, agreed that maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe we should rapidly stop climate change. But even in 2015, it still couldn't bring itself to actually talk about the elephant in the room, which was fossil fuels. You have to dig through the text. It's inferred that we need to stop dangerous interference in the Earth's climate. It's inferred that's because we're increasing concentrations of CO2, because it's inferred it's coming from fossil fuels, right? But at least there was the international agreement that we need to rapidly phase out our dangerous interference. And then the only way we're going to do that is by stopping burning coal, oil and gas, right? And everybody understood that. Everybody agreed that. And what it did, it said, what dangerous is 2 degrees Celsius, and not just 2 degrees Celsius, but well below 2 degrees Celsius. And that's come to be understood and interpreted as 1.5. So this is where you get the expression, 1.5 is still alive, or hold the line at 1.5. And at the time, that was a tremendous success for those people most vulnerable to climate change, which are people living in low-lying island nation states, people who live in developing nations in the global south and coastal communities. Because if we see warming above 1.5, then those people will not be able to live there anymore. Entire nations will literally disappear under the rising sea. When you factor in then increasing evidence that there's going to be more damaging storms, more lethal heat waves, there is abundant evidence that well below 2 degrees Celsius means no more than 1.5. Now, what we should have done then, of course, is implement policies, come up with bilateral agreements, work international politics, include wider society, include industry in the rapid phase out of coal, oil and gas. Now, the reason we're here today is because, once again, that didn't happen. And in some respects, it just plays on the latest series of kind of disappointments. What we've seen since 2015 is an awful lot of good talk, an awful lot of treaties, initiatives, and some of these are being bundled around this idea of net zero. So what I'm probably going to do for the rest of my allocated time is talk about how net zero isn't necessarily a solution, because it continues to kick the can down the road, because it continues to stop us doing what we need to do, which is stop burning coal, oil and gas. You get the message, right? We've got to stop both, right? But this is a message that people find it very, very hard to listen to. And in some respects, when Greta and other people say we must listen to the science, listen to the scientists, they're telling us we must avoid dangerous climate change. In some examples or instances, scientists have not helped, because scientists and wider academia have helped create a narrative whereby we can do two things. We can avoid 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. 1.5 is still alive. It's 5 minutes to midnight, but we can still do it. But at the same time, nothing really fundamental needs to change in our high consumption intensive lifestyle, in our high greenhouse gas emitting emission lifestyles. It enables us to maintain two things at the same time. And these two things cannot both be true. You either want to limit warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which means the stopping of burning all fossil fuels in about 10 years, probably less than 10 years. Because we put so much carbon into the Earth's atmosphere now, we've probably only got about 320 gigatons of carbon, 320 billion tons of carbon left before we exceed the 1.5 budget for a 50-50 chance. Right? We've got about a flip of a coin. If we manage to stop burning coal, oil and gas such that we only emit another 320 billion tons, we're going to have about a 50-50 chance of limiting warming to no more than 1.5 degrees. That means all fossil fuel use ends within the next 10 years. Because current emissions are on the order of 40 billion tonnes of greenhouse gases, or billion tonnes of carbon dioxide a year. So it's pretty simple maths. Even I can do that maths. So how can we see scenarios and policies proposed by the United Kingdom government? Remember, the UK is often held up as a climate champion, right? We, proud citizens, were the first country to implement legally binding decarbonisation targets, and that's great, right? The Climate Change Act. We were the first to put in legally binding targets of such an aggressive nature to get to, let's say, net zero by 2050. 2050, by my arithmetic, is more than 10 years hence. So how are we able to do these things? How are we to hold these two things? And we'll be able to do that because this thing called net zero. Because if you propose ways of removing carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere, then you can continue to emit it, right? If we continue to emit 10 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere every year, but at the same time are able to remove 10 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere, then all the atmosphere cares about is the net contribution, and if that's zero, then we've won, right? So what we've done is we've confected a scenario, and some of these scenarios can be simple thought experiments, some can be extremely complicated integrated assessment models, which are very, very complicated in detail, but the fundamental result's the same. We are proposing a scenario where we're not going to decarbonise too fast, we're not going to ask people to stop flying, we're not going to call for dietary change, we're not going to say that anything fundamentally different has to happen, certainly in the rich, developing, high-emitting nations. What we're going to do is we're going to say we will remove those emissions over the course of this century. So we are now officially in what they call an overshoot scenario. Temperatures are going to exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius any single year, probably within the next 5 years. But when we're thinking about climate change, we're looking at the long-term trend, trends over 10 to 20 years or so. So if it comes to the budget, that budget is going to be gone probably within the next 10 to 8 years. But then they'll say, don't worry. What we'll do is we'll just remove the carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere, so by the end of the century, by 2100, temperatures will come back down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now that's a nice, comforting, rosy picture of the future. It's a picture in which I don't really have to change anything fundamental in my life, and through innovation and science and technology and lots of clever people, we'll fix the problem. But of course, the issue is an issue of intergenerational justice, because it's not me who's going to fix that. As much as I'd like to think that I'm going to invent some kind of revolutionary way of removing carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere, these ways already exist, and I'm not sure humanity is going to improve upon the performance of something like a tree. We know that trees absorb carbon dioxide. We know that peatlands absorb carbon dioxide, or mangroves, or seagrass, or seaweed. All these, what we call nature-based solutions, do the job for free. The problem is they're really slow. They fail to get with a neoliberal program of climate change and science and policy, and they insist on taking decades, if not centuries, to reach their climax ecosystem states. And so they're not going to do it for us in time. Also, for these nature-based solutions, trees have an unfortunate habit of catching fire and burning down and releasing the carbon back into the Earth's atmosphere. So they're not what we call durable solutions. If we were decarbonising at a very rapid rate, then we would be able to augment this decarbonisation with these nature-based solutions such that we could limit warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. In my opinion, I think 1.5 degrees Celsius is simply lost. There isn't any kind of indication that we're going to see the widespread change required for that, because we're talking about a cessation of all fossil fuel use within 10 years. Well, you could do that if you want to implode the global economy, or if there's something very, very bad that happens to humanity. But if you just want to turn off all fossil fuel use tomorrow, then billions of people are going to die because we're going to starve, because we drive our food systems still largely on fossil fuels. So there needs to be some continued use of fossil fuels. There also needs to be continued use of fossil fuels in developing nations, in poorer nations, nations which haven't undertaken anything like the industrialisation and development that we have in the rich north, United Kingdom, Europe, United States. So what that means, if you're taking seriously the notion of equity in Paris, which is what we should be doing, then rich nations should be decarbonising even faster. So if there's a global budget of the next 10 years, then the United Kingdom should be getting there first. It was the first nation to industrialise. It was the first nation to reap the benefits of industrialisation. There was plummeting death rates, demographic transitions. It's also a nation which has largely done a lot of the hard work already. We've decarbonised energy systems. That's because we fired all the miners in the 1980s and coal has collapsed. But we can demonstrate to the world that we have had the technology and also the social and political will to decarbonise energy systems. The things that politicians continue to not want to go anywhere near are the behavioural change elements and what they consider to be the harder to decarbonise sectors such as transport and food. But none of that is impossible. So on the one hand, I think we need a form of hope, which isn't kind of hopium, it's not holding out for technological solutions, but it's a form of grounded hope. And I guess, if I'm going to conclude my little section here, is the kind of hope that I see coming from maybe events like this, is the hope that social change can happen an awful lot faster than people appreciate, or maybe even dare to dream about. When you're looking at how academia and scientists are thinking about the future, it's a future which looks awfully like today. It's a future in which the rates of decarbonisation are kind of speed limited. There's only so fast societies can change, is the assumption. And once you bake in those assumptions to how quickly societies can change, how quickly we can get off fossil fuels, then you are necessarily baking in a whole bunch of technological solutions you need to bring along. For example, carbon dioxide removal. And probably when those things don't emerge in time, or we realise those things are not going to emerge in time over the next 10 to 20 years, then the next narratives we're going to be having around geoengineering, the deliberate modification in the amount of energy we receive from the sun, which is an even scarier topic for discussion, because whilst there are lots of co-benefits, like planting trees or restoring habitats, a lot of the explicit geoengineering techniques are probably going to be incredibly destructive to some people and to some habitats and to some places. But the situation will be so dire, the motivation will be doing it anyway, because the alternative is even worse. Now, we can avoid all of these terrible kind of obscene choices if we relax our constraints on what might actually be possible. So Extinction Rebellion is important like that, because it takes the science and actually gets people to think about what the science means. I can't offer you science fiction. I can't, in all good faith, I've tried, and there's quite a bit of money to do it, I've tried to invoke optimistic scenarios where we will just solve the future climate problem with carbon removal. Or if that doesn't work, we'll fix it with geoengineering. And I can't, because I just don't believe it. And what's more, I've got the evidence on my side. These solutions don't exist. The most that we are doing is offering the solutions will exist by the time my kids have to deal with it. And remember, if we are going into a carbon removal overshoot scenario, it's not as if we'll just have to do this for a year. My children will have to figure out how to remove 5, 10, 20 billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere every single year for the rest of their life. And their kids are going to have to figure out how to do it as well. And if that doesn't work, then we are going to be relying on geoengineering. So we have a rapidly narrowing window of opportunity where we can avoid these kind of futures. So in that respect, it's still 5 minutes to midnight. I think 1.5 is gone, so we need to have a grounded sense of hope about what is possible, given decades and centuries of inaction. We can't wish that away. We can't invoke science and engineering to suddenly magically fix all this. We have to own that. We have to own the fact that we have failed in very important ways. We have to own the fact that we didn't listen to Jim Hansen in the late 1980s, or people even before that. The notion that there is something systemically fundamentally wrong with our extractivist capitalist civilization isn't exactly new. It's been decades in the development, but thus far it's still been unable to fundamentally challenge the power structures which continue to make an awful lot of wealth, an awful lot of political power and capital from it. So this is what I see we've got to do. This is the job that we've got to do. We've got to listen to the science, we've got to be honest with ourselves, we've got to accept our failures, but then also don't lose sight of the hope that we do have at this very moment, which is to fundamentally shape that future. If we don't shape that future, other people, other forces will be more than happy to shape them for us. And there is abundant evidence of the kind of future that's going to produce. It's not a future I want to live in, and I know it's not a future that you do either. Thank you very much. And now, exit stage left.
That was so powerful, James. Thank you very much.
James has focused very much on why action is so urgently needed. I'm going to focus on how we plan to take that action and what we as Extinction Rebellion are asking of people. XR's plan is to start with the big one. The big one will focus on the area around Parliament with massive participation in a peaceful, inclusive protest. Why am I getting feedback? We'll return day after day from Friday the 21st to Monday the 24th of April with our supporting organisations, making it clear that we all expect a meaningful response, genuine action from government. We won't. We can't afford to give up. History has shown that all over the world, non-violent direct action works. And it has worked for Extinction Rebellion. In April 2019, approximately 50,000 people occupied 5 bridges over the Thames. Operating in shifts, we stayed day and night. We refused to move. And we got a climate and ecological emergency declared in Parliament just 2 weeks later. The impact of that reverberated around the world. I say we, because I was there, and it was of course exciting. It was hugely empowering, and it reignited my hope and my determination. At that time, I thought that my own motivation was mainly frustration at the political lack of action. I've become aware since then that actually there were other drivers. Regret, shame at our collective inaction, and huge sadness about what we've already lost. You've chosen to give up some of your time to be here this evening. I wonder what motivated you to do that? What values underlie the choices that we make? I've spoken before at these talks about the transformative experience that motherhood had on me. And about my deep connection with my grandson since he was very small. I see now that it goes beyond that. It's not, because it's not just about them. The really visceral connection I felt with my own newborn has since then developed into something much more encompassing, a sense that everything is interconnected. And it's that sense of connection. Connection with all that I value, with everything on this, our only viable planet, that keeps me working away, plugging away with Extinction Rebellion. And I'd like now to invite either Lavinia or Marilyn, I'm not sure who's going first, to say a little bit about their experience with Extinction Rebellion. Lavinia?
Yeah. Mary. Thank you, Mary, that was gorgeous. Yeah, so I'm going to follow on a little bit from what Mary said and talk about my coming to Extinction Rebellion. I started coming about a year ago, and before that I also found Extinction Rebellion when I was in Canada. So when I was in Vancouver, for a year before that, I was really inspired by what was happening there. But they were inspired by this by you guys. They were inspired by what was happening in the UK. So that was really cool to come back here and get involved with everybody and join the group. And I must say that the reasons for joining were for my kids. Because I couldn't imagine just like looking at Dominic and 10 years time, I don't know, I hope. And him, what would he say to me? That sort of thing. So it's very similar to you, Mary, that comes back to my family. And I'll pass it on to Marilyn.
Get out.
Try this route. So, can you hear me without the microphone?
Yes.
Yeah, right, I'll do that then. Okay, right, I was first in Exeter Rebellion in 2019, in the April Rebellion there, where we took the bridges. It was one of the most exciting things that happened in my life, really. I mean, apart from, you know, everybody has these things, well, not everybody, but when your kids are born and all those sorts of stuff, you know. But apart from that, it was just so empowering. And it just changed my life totally. I've been an ex-teacher. I've done a few interesting things in my life apart from that. In fact, that bit wasn't so interesting really, but you know, apart from that, you know, I was just, you know, plodding along. I don't mind living. I'm retired. You know, got a pension, enough to live on, and you know, having quite a good time really. But then you realise what's happening, and I joined that, and yeah, I got arrested, and it's all right for me, you know, because if I get arrested, the pension schemes come in, and so I've got that freedom to do that, you know, whereas I'm very aware that not everybody can do it, you know, they've got family to look after, they might lose their job, they might lose their, you know, their permission to stay in this country, whatever it is. So I've got that freedom, so I think it's incumbent on me to do that, because I'm one of the people who can do it. So I've been arrested 3 times. Only once did I get taken to court, because it's absolutely just chance whether they decide to prosecute you or not. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So it happened once. And I got a conditional discharge and a bit of a fine, so it wasn't too bad. But, you know, just this whole idea of, it's not that bad, you know, like, so where's the big deal? So you know, it made a big difference to my life. It gave me someone who'd been perhaps fairly cautious, law-abiding. I said, well, if you're not, so what? You know, so that was good. And it's not that bad. And one thing it taught me, one lesson was that I was told before I got arrested, was when you're there in the police cell, and thinking, oh God, this is a bit grim, you know, it's a bit cold, and they're not very cosy, to be honest. But they let you out in the middle of the night, you know, in London, and you're not sure where you are, and you've got to get back to where you're staying. But there's a group of people there from Extinction Rebellion with biscuits, flasks, telling you how to get home, or back to where you're staying, what bus to catch in the middle of the night, have you got the money to do it? They're really, it's lovely, and that is one of the great things about Extinction Rebellion, is that they care an awful lot, and you'll never feel let down by them. And so perhaps just as another, just a little example of how good they are, was a few weeks ago I got a bit overwhelmed. I was volunteering to do a lot of stuff, and it's not just the exciting stuff of being out on the streets, there's also a lot of other jobs to be done, which can be a bit of a grind like anything else. And I phoned someone up. I was meant to be ringing around a load of people, and I just said, oh, I'm sorry, I just emailed them and said, sorry, I'm a bit overwhelmed, I can't do it, I'm going to let this one go, if you don't mind. And within the hour, somebody from XR Support had rung me up and said, you okay? And I was just so impressed, I nearly cried, because, you know, they're just such a caring group of people. So I've made more friends in XR than anything else I've ever joined. It's a really positive experience, whatever you're doing, whether you think you might be arrested, whether you're going to go on marches but not get arrested, whether you're going to ring round people and not do anything public at all, whether you're going to paint banners, whatever it is, there's all sorts of jobs in there. But they're an amazingly caring group of people, and I'm very proud to be on them.
Thanks very much. It's nice to have a change of voices and nice to be made to laugh as well. Back to the plan, XR's plan for the big one. 2019 was about sounding the alarm. In the 4 years since then, public concern about the climate and ecological emergency has massively increased. Bear in mind that's alongside a crashing economy, a barely functioning NHS, a cost of living crisis, and a tragic war in Europe. Despite all this, many people really understand that we have to face these twin crises for our planet, crises that threaten our very survival, as James powerfully pointed out. Many, even most, don't realise quite how serious and urgent it is. However, they are way ahead of politicians and the media. Polls have found that 66% of the public support non-violent direct action to protect the environment. However, vested interest, fossil fuel companies, media barons spend literally millions of pounds trying to sow distrust and divide us. And like what James has said about the scientific community, I think, to be honest, as campaigning groups, we've sometimes made it rather too easy for them. We focus on the differences instead of the overwhelming unity of concerns and aims. We share so much more than our differences would suggest, and sometimes our own rhetoric would suggest. So, XR's plan for April is to embrace inclusion. We've sought the support of other major organisations. We want the big one to be for everybody. We want 100,000 people protesting around Parliament. This is hugely ambitious. It's also an extraordinary opportunity, and we've made an excellent start. We've successfully connected with more than 70 large organisations who share our concerns. It's taken a lot of listening, of collaboration. Many concessions have had to be made, and everybody has to keep remembering that we need each other. We can only do this together, combining our very different strengths. XR has experience in organising huge participatory events, in keeping people safe, in keeping participants comfortable, taking care of them, as Marilyn described. It has experience in bringing the unexpected, the dramatic, the visually striking, and colour to the streets. Other organisations have huge reach and respectability. They're a lot safer than we'd seen. People are scared of us, not as scared of, as they are perhaps of our other allies, just of oil and insulate Britain, but nevertheless a little bit frightened of getting involved. So this coming together is hopefully going to be very positive. XR also has very clear demands, and this April will be promoting our demand for direct participatory democracy in the form of citizens' assemblies to address the existential crises that we've been talking about today. We've all seen and continue to experience that politicians can't break this deadlock on their own. So the big one in April is an amazing opportunity to show the powers that be that we are united in our aims and determination. The big one represents a new and powerful way of putting pressure on government. And we've been clear that our plan for April isn't about disrupting the public. We're going to Parliament, to key ministries and nowhere else. Our allies understand that we've listened to those who say that they share our aims, but not necessarily our methods. This time, the tactic is different. XR will not be using arrest as a tactic. Hope you managed to enjoy it all the same, Marilyn. The police are with us on this. They don't want arrests either. They've made it very clear that we have a legal right to protest in this way. So our tactic this time is numbers. 100,000 peaceful protesters and the inclusion of mainstream groups maximises the impact of the protest and minimises the ability of tabloids and politicians to portray us as crazy radicals or terrorists. This is about survival. It isn't about personal lifestyle or where you get your news. It's about strength in numbers and standing together with the courage of our convictions until our demands are met. The toxic system that we live in can seem overwhelmingly strong, impregnable, but dominant systems do topple if enough people push together at the right time in sufficient numbers. So we need those numbers. And that's why our second focus is to get individuals to sign up and commit to joining us on April the 21st or one of the other days leading up to the 24th. Ideally, of course, all 4 days, but we know this will be a rolling process. The point is, there are millions of people out there who actually want to do something, and we need to invite them. Our online ticker shows the numbers growing, and this is crucial because it builds confidence and momentum. And one of our main asks is to get everyone to ask more people to come along, to bring more people to come along with them. It's going to be a family-friendly protest. There's no reason why you shouldn't bring your cousin from Canada, or your niece, or your small children, or your teenage children. Your teenage children might bring you. If we can get that everybody inviting more people, we get exponential growth, and that is actually how big change happens. And a reminder, no one has to become a rebel. This is a protest, not a rebellion. So you don't have to risk arrest at all. The police aren't expecting that. However, by signing up to XR Exeter's mailing list, you can keep involved, you can find out what's going on, you can get the latest news, and you can work out how to support what we're doing in the lead up to and during this historic event. Of course, what we'd really like is to commit, if you can commit yourself this evening, and there'll be lots of ways to do that, and there'll be somebody on your table who can help with that, give you, signpost you to the right point. As I think Marilyn again has referred to, much of what the work that needs to be done is administrative, logistical and creative, and much of that can be done from home. So that kind of support is viable even if you can't get to London. Whatever skills, experience and time you've got is useful and will be used. This is about thousands of people offering to do their bit. With that combined energy and strength, we can achieve incredible things. James, particularly in a talk he gave to a global assembly, referred to climate tipping points. Really, really scary stuff. But there are political and social tipping points too. And maybe the big one could be the start of one of those cascading effects that become more and more powerful. 100,000 people together, where the power is, united in love, non-violence and determination, could be the start of this. But we can only have hope if we're willing to act. Think back for a moment to the conversation you had at the start about what you love and value the most. Please take that with you into your discussions tonight. Please take that with you as you decide how to do your bit. Thank you for listening.